Welcome to Collars and Calluses, a working theology for young men, where grit meets grace and faith meets the workbench, where young men can come to learn how to grow in the strength, wisdom, and courage that God calls them to. In a world confused about manhood, we open God's Word and roll up our sleeves. We'll talk theology that's not just for the classroom, but for the job site, the gym, the family table, and the front lines of life. We are about forging biblical masculinity that works in the real world for real men to the glory of God. This is Collars and Calluses. Let's get to work. Welcome to another episode of Collars and Calluses. We're glad that you're with us this week. Last week, we had some time off, and I hope you were able to listen to that podcast, one of Rich's talks in a church on masculinity. So hopefully you were able to listen to that. But we're picking up where we left off last time with anger. We're kind of working through some themes in Proverbs, and Solomon has a lot to say about anger and what his son is supposed to do with it. And just to remind you what Proverbs is all about, Solomon is training his son, who is a king in waiting. He's a prince. He's ready to come, and he's ready to rule. And Solomon is teaching him wisdom. And when it takes wisdom to have dominion over the creation, to arrange it the way it needs to be arranged under the lordship of God's son. And so he's training him to take up this Adamic mission of dominion, to bring God's wise order to the world. And in dealing with anger, one of the things that is concerning to him, of course, young men with the desire to exercise power, anger is kind of a power that can run out of control. It can be a fire that, if it's not contained like it's supposed to, not directed toward proper source, can not only does not bring wise order, it destroys order. Sinful anger is destructive to wise order, and therefore it's counterproductive to our mission, especially as young men. That's where we're focusing our discussions here. Anger is inevitable at times. There are times where it's a sin not to be angry, because God is angry. He's angry at sin. He deals with those things properly. He expects us to deal with them properly. But anger is inevitable, and at times absolutely necessary, and when it has the right aims and it conducts itself in the right way. But anger must be disciplined for the mission, because it can, as I alluded to, it can get out of control. Disciplining your anger goes to your purpose as a human. So this is not merely a technique. It's not merely a trick to win friends and influence people. That's not what we're talking about. Consequently, this is not optional behavior for a Christian. We're not saying, okay, well, this is a way to do certain things, and this is maybe a better way, but there are some alternative ways that maybe, anger is a possibility, or sinful anger is a possibility. That's not the case at all. This wise order, this mission that we have, and the way we control our anger is absolutely necessary to what it means to be a Christian. Paul tells us in Galatians 5:19-21 about the works of the flesh. And one of the works of the flesh is indeed outbursts of anger. We think, well, and he's got so many other sins listed there, and we think, well, outbursts of anger, really, I mean, why would he be including that? And especially with the consequence that he has when he says that those who do these things, those who practice these works of the flesh, they will not inherit the kingdom of God. So this is not merely some type of technique. This is not an alternative way of life just to be able to do things a little bit better. This is absolutely essential to your mission as a man, is learning how to discipline your anger, learning how to focus it in the right direction, have the right purpose for it, have the right aims, and have the right conduct in your mission. And so as we think about these things, understand, and I realize that when we talk about anger, it may not be as an exciting topic as the things that we've talked about with the intersexual dynamics and all those types of things. But this is just as vital to your mission as any of those other things. So, Rich, give us your perspective on how anger fits into the mission of young men?
Yeah, Bill. So we have talked about, you just mentioned this, sexual sin can derail a man from his mission. Unrestrained anger can as well. So if we can back up and I can kind of review here for a minute, remember
Yep.
Proverbs is set in the context of the creation mandate of Genesis chapter 1. And in Genesis chapter 1, God gives to humanity this overarching mission of ruling the earth, subduing the earth, having dominion over the earth, and being fruitful, multiplying, and filling the earth. And so everything in Proverbs is set within that context. Proverbs is really wisdom about how to carry out the creation mandate in a fallen world. And it shows us two paths, two ways. There's the way of the wise man, and there's the way of the fool. And the fool is his foolishness is going to keep him from playing the kind of role that God wants him to play, that God designed him to play and calls him to play in fulfilling that creation mandate. So again, like we've talked about sexual sin, how that derails you from your mission. Same kind of thing if you don't exercise emotional self-control. As you grow to maturity, one of the ways that maturity is manifested is in how you keep your emotions in check. And it really is interesting to me that in Galatians chapter 5, as you mentioned, this is one of the outbursts of anger or outbursts of rage is one of those things that will keep you
Mhm.
from inheriting the kingdom of God. So it doesn't just frustrate your fulfillment of the creation mandate. Rage that's not kept in check, anger that isn't controlled and channeled in constructive ways, can actually damn you. So this falls into the overarching mandate that creational mission God has given to us. But we can also say, as a Christian, in a sense, fighting against unrighteous anger and learning how to control your anger it's an essential part of the Christian life. That goes for all of our emotions and
Yeah.
all of our desires. God wants us to be the kind of men who can build a kingdom. You know, God's entrusted to us our little realm or domain within the creation, and we're to develop it and cultivate it. God's handed you a talent, He's handed you a mina. You are to develop it and give God a good return on His investment. If you don't learn how to control your emotions, if you don't learn how to exercise emotional self-control, it's going to prevent those things from happening. Your kingdom will never be aligned with God's kingdom the way that it should. And you'll be building a kingdom that's counter to God's kingdom.
Right.
So learning this is really, really crucial. And we've talked about already how there's righteous and unrighteous anger. There are many things where it is perfectly legitimate to be angry. You know, many things where it's perfectly legitimate to have anger, but righteous anger is always channeled in constructive ways. Unrighteous anger is always destructive. And so it's just like in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus talks about how the seed of lust can grow into adultery. Sin is never static, it's always dynamic, it's
Right.
growing unless you kill it. And it's the same kind of thing with anger. Anger can turn into all kinds of other sins. You can do all kinds of unrighteous things if you don't channel your anger and control your anger in the right kind of way and deal with it properly. So, in terms of growing to wisdom, growing to maturity, it's absolutely essential that men learn how to do this. And this is a sin that I think, particularly young men, if you weren't given a lot of discipline when you were growing up and you didn't internalize that discipline and learn how to be self-disciplined, it's something a lot of young men really struggle with today is anger.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
going to ask you. I was going to ask you in your pastoral ministry. I know I've got my own experiences in your pastoral ministry. Have you seen young men that this is a kind of a common problem to have young men really wrestling with issues of anger or men in general?
well, yeah, I mean, thankfully, a lot of the young men I deal with are very much on the right track and going in the right direction and learning and growing, and they're becoming the kind of men that they need to be. But yes, I've absolutely seen it, and of course, it's the kind of thing that if you didn't learn it when you were really young, if your parents didn't build this kind of discipline into you, then it becomes much harder to learn that discipline when you're older, but you absolutely have to learn it. I think the other thing that some men do is they so completely suppress their emotions.
Hmm.
They're so afraid of their own emotions. They've got another, there's another set of issues that comes with that. But here we're dealing with what happens if you don't learn how to control your anger, and it can be a huge disaster. So we know what kind of sins anger can, just like we know what kind of sins lust can lead to. We know what kind of sins anger can lead to.
Yeah.
Sins always travel in packs. Sins
Yeah.
come in clusters. They come in bunches. And so anger is associated with a lot of other
Really.
very destructive sins.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I mean, the fact that a lot of men will sometimes kind of squash their emotions, especially their anger. One of the things that happens in that, and I've seen this, is that it builds up and builds up, and eventually just a guy explodes one way or another, and it can be very, very destructive. We're going to talk some about that today, about that kind of explosive type of anger. But this is a real issue in dealing with men in general, because we do have a tendency toward, and I think that's one of the reasons why Solomon deals with it with his son, is because we have a tendency toward that sinful expression of anger, and we have to control it. And those,
So let's
yeah,
turn it around for just a minute. Let's say you're not the young man. Let's say you're the father raising a son.
yeah,
Well, this is something that you will make your son's life much easier in the long run if you teach him emotional self-control. Sometimes parents think, oh, well, I can't really discipline for emotions because they're emotions. But no, actually, the Bible does tell us how to feel, what to
right,
feel,
yeah,
in what proportion we should feel it. So, and we talked about this last time, I think it was, our emotions have to be calibrated to reality and in sync with God's law.
yeah,
And so if you're a father, and this, and of course, this would go for daughters too, but we're really talking about sons here, you really do want to make sure you're disciplining for those, what we might call attitudinal sins or
yeah.
emotional sins. That's a crucial part of parenting.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've probably mentioned on this podcast before, because I've used it a number of times talking to parents, parenting classes, and um, when you're dealing with your young child and talking about disciplining emotions, one of the things that you have to think about every time you see your young child acting a certain way or acting out or expressing anger, and I find it interesting because a lot of people think, well, this is funny. This toddler is throwing this fit, throwing himself on the floor, yelling, screaming, or hitting, or whatever. One of the things that you had, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the seeds that are being planted. One of the things that a parent has to do, a father has to do, is ask himself, what does this look like in 20 years?
Right.
Uh, because if that's not cut off, it's leaven. It just, and it grows and it grows and it grows. And if you don't do something with that, if you don't control it as a parent, if you don't help him learn how to control it, then it's going to be out of control later, and the world will respond to him. And it's going to be more pain than you would ever have inflicted on him in any kind of discipline, because he's going to absolutely ruin his life and indeed may not inherit the kingdom of God. That's the ultimate consequence. And so, as fathers, we have to help them control these emotions, and especially this anger.
Yeah, going back to what you asked about young men, one thing I would say is that I think, and I would think that your church and mine would not be the kind of communities that are filled with this, but it's certainly present in culture. Is a lot of young men have legitimate grievances. They're angry
Yeah.
about things that are messed up about the world. But again, it's what you do with that anger. And I think a lot of young men, because they don't know what to do with that anger, it does go in unhealthy directions, and it actually it stunts their growth as men, and it actually becomes counterproductive. It actually makes it harder for them to get what they
Yeah.
want. There are ways as a young man in today's world, even with certain things that are stacked against you, there are ways to make it, and we could say fulfill the creation mandate in your life and build the kind of life that you can be very happy with. But if you don't learn how to control your anger, that's not going to happen.
Right, right. It's going to be destruction. Well, just getting into some, there are a number of objects of anger, and we'll probably go past some of the things that I have written down in my notes here. But ultimately, when we can't control our anger, when we have sinful anger, the ultimate object of our anger is God Himself. We don't like, God does not center His plans around me and what I want to do. And anger is some sinful anger is, in one sense, the expression of a blocked goal. And so I'm blocked from what I want to do. I don't get to do what I want to do, so I respond by trying to take power over this thing, or react against it and show my displeasure with it. God doesn't center His plans around me and what I want, and I become frustrated. And we will talk about the fact that, well, I'm frustrated with these circumstances, or I'm frustrated with that person over there. But ultimately, when we've sinned ultimately against God himself, and he is the object because he is sovereign over the universe. And we're angry with him. We're angry that he didn't give us what we wanted. And so our expression of sinful anger is then directed toward God himself. And I think that's one of the things that we have to notice about ourselves and be ready to confess when we express our anger, when our anger becomes sinful, is that we are sinning against God. Now, we can also be angry with ourselves. We do things that we ought not. That can be justified anger. We can get frustrated with ourselves. We sometimes, though, we can put unreasonable expectations upon ourselves, and therefore we never can meet those expectations, and we just live as angry men. And I think one of the faults of high achievers is that lots of times we do have higher expectations of ourselves than we can achieve. Psalm 103, in Psalm 103, the Psalm says that that our Father knows that we are dust. He understands, he knows that our limitations. And there are lots of times that we expect more of ourselves than even God expects of us. We expect many times, and sometimes we're trying to be God himself because we're trying to live without limitations. And we put on these unrealistic expectations on ourselves and maybe upon others. And we become angry. That has to be kept in check because you do have limitations. You are not God. We'll get into some of the consequences of that later and some of the ramifications of that a little bit later. But you have to be careful not to become too angry with yourself over unrealistic expectations. So we can be angry with God, we can be angry with ourselves, we can be angry with circumstances. Things aren't the way that I want them to be. And of course, we can be angry with others. Someone has said or done something we don't like. So there are lots of different objects of sinful anger. Rich, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's good.
Okay. Well, there are ways that we express our anger, and we need to understand in what ways do we express unrighteous anger. And one of the ways there, and there are several, one of the ways that we express that unrighteous anger is revenge. We want to get back at the person. Now, this may be outwardly aggressive or it may be manipulatively passive. But when we become angry with someone and we want to get back at them, we find ways to make them pay for what they've done. And in those situations, we lose perspective on the situation and become singularly focused on how to get back at them. One Roman poet named Horace said, "Anger is a short madness." We lose our ability to see. We become temporarily insane. Now, that's not the legal definition. That doesn't get us out of the responsibility and taking responsibility for our anger. But it is, as he says, kind of a short madness, a temporary insanity, because we become singularly focused and we want revenge on the person. We want to pay them back. And that revenge, the unrighteous anger, can also be expressed in bitterness. And bitterness is a brooding anger. And bitterness can arise from a lot of areas, things that have been done to you, and things that were necessarily and may have been sinful that were done to you, and you holding on to things and you haven't forgiven the way you were or were not taught. I know growing up, I wasn't taught a lot of things, and you feel like the rest of your life you're playing catch up. And in those times, you can become angry, you can become bitter at the things that you were not taught. That goes back, obviously, to the objects of our anger being God himself, because in his providence, there are reasons why you lived the life that you lived. Now, that doesn't take responsibility away from anybody who did or did not teach you along the way, but there are reasons why God brought you through what he brought you through. And you can be thankful for those reasons, and you don't have to be bitter. The way you were treated by your parents or a relative or whatever, you can become bitter over those things. But one of the things that we're seeing, and I think Rich brought up a little bit earlier, is that there is among young men right now, there's a generational anger. And you hear the word boomer, and in that there's this vitriol. There's a, it's just this. There's this anger that's almost in that's almost just part of that word now, is because it's kind of like, okay, boomer, and there's this generational anger because boomers, of course, right now are living the high life, so to speak, with all the wealth that was accumulated, and now at the expense of future generations. And there are some real things. There are some real situations in which, yes, there are problems that we talked about, and but the answer is not to sit and stew and be bitter about the older generation. Now, Rich, do you have any more to add to that as you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, I think the generational tensions are definitely a big deal right now.
Yeah,
And again, a lot of that is understandable. But I think also you have to recognize that just being angry about it doesn't solve anything. Your calling is not to pick which generation you're going to live in, but to live as faithfully as you can within that time that God has given you. So I do understand it's true. The boomers did wreck a lot of things. That's certainly the case. I think some of that also sometimes gets exaggerated, or boomers get blamed for things that weren't their fault. They were already going on before the boomer generation. Having a really large generation, and so it's kind of easy to pin a lot of things on them. A lot of the things that we deal with that are very problematic in our culture today were things that were set in motion before the boomers, and
yeah,
they intensified in the boomer generation. But a lot of the prosperity that came, the boomers just happened to be the generation that came after we had won World War II, and Europe is in shambles, and much of the world is trying to recover, and we did not, because the war was fought elsewhere, we had a lot of advantages. And so we, of course, we're going to have incredible economic success in the aftermath of that, and the boomers were big beneficiaries of that. That's not normal. That's not a normal thing. So the kind of prosperity they enjoyed is not the kind of thing that every generation should even expect to enjoy.
right.
But there have obviously been a lot of other issues that have come along, and people point to things like, well, the national debt, or ways boomers spend their money, or it's all kinds of things. Are they hoarding wealth when they should be passing it along to the next generation? There's a lot of things like that. And I do think some of those things, again, really do happen. I think they can be real grievances. But again, complaining about that on social media is not gonna fix it. You've got to do the best you can with where you are, and just being angry about it is not gonna, again, that's not a solution. So that's what I would say, is that when you identify a real problem like that, you want to use that, you want to be wise in how you deal with it. You want to work towards actually solving the problem. You want to
Yeah,
make sure you don't perpetuate it yourself. Because I always think, like, so it's easy to attack the boomers, but fast forward 50 years, what's a future generation going to say about the millennials? Or I
right.
mean, every generation can have certain grievances about those who have come before them, and turn them into an easy target and even a kind of scapegoat. And I do think that, well, so I will just say, God designed the generations to work together. Proverbs talks about this,
Mhm.
how um, the glory of the old man is his grandchildren, the glory of children are their fathers. Generations are supposed to glory in one another. That's God's design. And the generations are supposed to be like links in a chain, and the faith is supposed to be passed on from one generation to the next. And inheritance is supposed to be passed down. We should probably do a whole episode on inheritance sometime. That inheritance is spiritual, that inheritance is financial, that inheritance is civilizational. And it's easy to look at the boomers and say, well, they kind of wrecked the church. They turned church into youth group. Seeds of that were planted long before the boomers, but that's what
Yeah,
really kind of came into its own. So the spiritual inheritance was lost in a lot of ways. When the boomers were first being born in the 40s and into the 50s, you could legitimately say that we were still plausibly a Christian nation. By the 60s, there was still a veneer of Christianity hanging around America, but we were clearly a very different nation.
yeah,
So obviously, the boomers did play some role in that. You can talk about the financial inheritance again. Are the boomers hoarding wealth that they should be passing along to their descendants? That's an interesting question. I think in a lot of cases they are, but in some cases, I'm sure they're not.
yeah,
And about the civilizational inheritance. The boomers were the generation that brought in sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the sexual revolution, and everything that came with it. And obviously that was very destructive. No question about that. So yeah, I understand the frustration, but again, being angry about it doesn't solve it. What you want to do is play your part in building a better world that you can pass on to your children and grandchildren. And the
Right.
way to do that is all the things we've talked about in this podcast. It's by
Right.
being faithful. It's the kind of thing Charlie Kirk would talk about with college students all the time. Trust in Jesus, live a faithful life, go to church, find a girl, marry her, have a bunch of kids, work hard at your job, become the best that you can at whatever it is you're called to do. It's very basic stuff, but that's what you do. That's how you actually have a shot at making things better.
Right. Yeah.
And it may be that things can't be made better in the sense that, I think one thing we have to face up to is the fact that if this is the judgment of God, there's no political solution, there's no systemic solution. The only solution to the judgment of God is repentance.
Right.
That's the only way to avert God's judgment. Think about Jonah with the Ninevites. Judgment's coming. What are you going to do about it? Well, the only thing you can do is repent and cry out to God for mercy. And I think that's kind of where we are. America still has a great deal of wealth. We still have a great deal of cultural momentum. God is exceedingly patient with us because you think about the number of babies we've murdered or what we've done
Yeah.
sexually or all kinds of other big cultural sins like greed and all kinds of things that even America has done in the world or that the American government has done. Obviously, we're ripe for judgment. God's being patient with us. So take
Yeah.
advantage of that patience. And again, start with where you are and
Yep.
do the best you can.
Yeah. There are some, I guess, some tests to see whether or not your anger is destructive or constructive. And if you are steeped in bitterness, if you are just wrapped up in bitterness, there are some things that are evident tokens or evident signs that that's indeed the case. If it's bitterness against a person, you replay over and over in your head how you're going to take revenge. But when it's just bitterness with a person or possibly with a generation, and this is one of the things again that we talked about seeing online, and I have seen it on social media. Uh, it looks as if just thoughts are consumed with this problem. The total focus is on how they created this mess. It's not on ways out. It's not on constructive things. You couldn't care less if all the boomers died tomorrow. You want them off the face of the earth. All this, you couldn't care less if something bad happened to other people. If those types of things are consuming you, you're in bitterness, and bitterness can turn into hatred. And you allow these things to simmer, and it turns into words and actions. It can turn into yelling and violence. It can move you in places that are indeed very destructive. As we were mentioning earlier, that it's a leaven that, if not cut off, will continue to grow and will get wild. And that's one of the things I think we see even across our nation. We see people who have gotten steeped in bitterness with things like, for instance, intersectionality, where they think they're victims about everything, or they're victims of society, they're victims of another race, and they allow that to just consume their thoughts and minds. And these people get in the streets, they become violent. The trans folks shooting up schools and things like that. They think they become very angry people, and of course they have problems before they even shoot up schools. But they let this continue to build and build and build, and then eventually they just explode. Now, some guys will say, well, that's the way I handle my anger. I just explode and then I'm okay. Well, and that's what a Claymore mine does too. It just explodes and then it's over with. But the damage that is done is can be long lasting, and it can hurt other people. Again, this is what's destructive. And so sometimes in our society, being transparent or authentic uh, is seen as this is the way you need to be. You need to express your feelings. You need to show everybody what you're feeling. You need to put it all online or whatever. Well, that's sinful. Proverbs 29:11 says, a fool vents all of his spirit. He vents all of his feelings. You vent online like this, and you express all your feelings. You express all your anger like this. You think you have to get it out. And so you put it online for the world to see, or for how many ever followers you have to see. And that's not a proper use of anger. Now, you can get into discussions, you can talk about things, and you can see how you can help move the discussion toward constructive things. But just getting online and venting is not going to help. And so you have to ask yourself the question before you express your anger. You have to ask, is it constructive? Or are you merely feeding the leaven of unrighteous anger? Unrighteous anger ultimately does not work. The wrath of man does not work the righteousness of God, James says. And so you need to be careful about the way you express your anger, especially in today's world. When you put it online, it's there forever, and it comes back to haunt you. I've seen this in a number of ways where guys who put things online regret them years later because it can ruin them. And so you need to be very, very careful. And of course, that's also true in your interpersonal relationships, that you need to be careful what you say and how you say it. You need to think before you speak. And we'll talk sometime in another podcast about how Solomon talks about speech in Proverbs. That's actually a very huge theme throughout Proverbs. But so you need to be careful. You need to think before you speak. And we're going to move into disciplining your anger here in just a second. But I want to see, Rich, do you have anything to add to any of those things?
No, I think that's good. I think that, yeah, no, I think that's good. Let's move on.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about disciplining your anger. The character of disciplined anger is summarized in one word, and that's patience. Patience. Just as anger is expressed and seen in the body, so is patience. Patience, literally in Proverbs, is being long faced. That is, you're relaxed. Being you're slow to anger. So the Bible is very descriptive about the way this expresses itself physically. Patience over the long haul has positive effects on the body, just as anger has negative effects on the body. And anger will get your cortisol up. Anger, and that really kind of screws with your system a lot. And so it really does, it can hurt you physically to be angry all the time, to be an angry person. So you need to learn how to develop patience. But what exactly is patience? Well, patience is actually a discipline. When you're a child, it is a discipline imposed upon you by your parents. And when you're an adult, it must become a self-discipline. And we've talked about this in other contexts. But again, this is the same principle applied to another area of your life. Self-discipline is the ability to master your mind, your feelings, and direct your desires, will, emotions, and body to accomplish something positive, your long-term goals. Patience is a specific type of self-discipline. It's the ability to calm and steel your mind through hope rooted in faith, so that you may be able to endure until you reach the goal. So you are able to get your mind under control. You're able to get your thoughts under control. And we're not simply talking about, again, a technique. Patience is rooted in, and this is the whole book of Proverbs. This is not really, Proverbs is not just kind of this Tony Robbins self-help book. This is all rooted in faith. It's rooted in faith that God is ultimately in control. And as you obey him, you can be calm. You can be calm and you can endure until you reach the goals that God has set out for us. Now, patience is not simply passively taking it. It's not an indifference to evil. Patience can still be angry, but it is angry for the right reason, and it expresses itself in the right ways. Patience takes time to take in all the information, think through it, controls the desire to react immediately to real or perceived wrongs. And that takes strength. That takes a lot of self-discipline. Patience requires a mental toughness and resiliency that can embrace pain as that which is useful to you, because it's going to be difficult to control yourself. Patience walks by faith. It's willing to wait on God to do his work in the situation, knowing he will fulfill his promises and he is faithful. So patience rests in the fact that everything that happens to me is under God's control and is meant to serve me, to make me better, to make me more like Christ himself. Now, Solomon says that a man who is slow to anger, a man who is patient, has great understanding in Proverbs 14:24. And that word translated understanding carries with it the idea of insight, competency, and skill. In the opening words of Proverbs, Solomon told his son that understanding was the goal of his discipline or his instruction in verse 2 of chapter 1. The one who is patient has insight. He has the ability to discern, to see right and wrong, good and evil, what will bring peace and what will bring chaos. And so patience is an absolutely necessary self-discipline for us. And it's the way you discipline your anger is to learn how to be patient in these situations. Okay, Rich, throwing it to you.
Yeah, that's good. Obviously, patience is an aspect of love, according to 1 Corinthians 13. And so I think you're exactly right to lay all of that out. One thing that God teaches us through frustrating situations or through trials and struggles that we have to endure is he's teaching us patience. Patience in some places in the Bible is almost synonymous with faith.
Yeah,
Patience doesn't mean you're not doing anything.
right,
And what are you doing while you wait, so to speak, while you're clinging to God's promises, you're continuing to trust in God and walk faithfully with him. So it's not that there's nothing for you to do. If there's some issue that's come up that needs to be resolved, do it. One thing you should not be doing, and this kind of goes back to what you were saying a few minutes ago, is ruminating on how something went wrong or how somebody wronged you.
right.
It's really interesting. Um, Rumination, which is thinking back over, in this case, thinking back over bad things again and again. Rumination is one of the biggest causes of depression. And it's one of the biggest reasons why therapy so often doesn't work. You come in, you sit down with a therapist, and you spend an hour talking about whatever it was that made you really angry or made you really bitter. Well, just replaying all of that in your mind and then
Mhm.
verbally does not help you get over it. In fact, one of the best things you can do is just get on with your life and
Right,
not keep thinking about it. If you keep replaying that tape in your mind again and again and again of what went wrong, it just makes you more angry, more bitter, very often more depressed.
right.
That's why one of the worst things that you can do is constantly introspect and look inside yourself and keep just thinking things over again and again and again. One of the best, and this is why, for a minute, so often said, men don't need a therapist, they just need a mission. I think that's really true. One of the best ways to get over whatever it is that went wrong is just to do the next thing, whatever that might be, to just plow ahead in faithfulness and keep your eyes fixed on the future and keep moving ahead. I think it's especially because we live in such a therapeutic culture, it's very easy to live in the past and to think that things that happen in the past will be what determines your future. And it does not have to be that way. So that rumination is something I would really, really counsel avoiding.
Yeah,
Obviously, we need to introspect at times so we can confess our sins. We
right.
need to introspect at times to see whether or not we have sinned and need to go set things right with somebody. But particularly when you've been wronged, just replaying that tape in your mind again and again and again is going to stir up anger, stir up bitterness. It's gonna make you angry. It's gonna make you depressed, most likely. The best thing to do is just forge ahead in faithfulness. Now, if somebody's wronged you, you also have the option of going to them and talking about it. That's another that's on the table. If you've been wronged in some way by another person, like when we're talking about larger cultural trends, like we've talked about, there's not anybody to go talk to in the sense of confront them about what's
Right.
been done. But if somebody in an interpersonal relationship is wronged you, one of the best things you can do is go have that conversation with them and see if you can set things right and patch up and renew the relationship and seek forgiveness or extend forgiveness as it's needed. But rumination is something that I think, our highly therapeutic culture trains us in, but it's something that we need to avoid
Yeah,
for all reasons.
absolutely. Well, one of the things that Solomon talks about with patience is the fact that it exhibits strength. We think anger exhibits strength. Um, and I guess in some ways it can. It can be a distortion of strength. But in Proverbs 16:32, Solomon says, whoever is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. Solomon's not criticizing mighty men or warriors. His father David was a mighty man and had mighty men around him. It's good to be a mighty man. The contrast is not between bad mighty men and good patient men. The comparison is between good mighty men and better patient men. Physical dominance can only take you so far in building mission. A warrior can take a city. Barbarians with strength, or a North Korean dictator or a Russian president with a nuclear weapon, can take other countries. But physical strength alone can't build a well-ordered city. That takes wisdom, and wisdom is patient, controlling one's spirit that wants to rage with physical strength and take control quickly. And that's one of the things that you see with geopolitical in the geopolitical world, but also so in our interpersonal relationships, is that anger is the quick fix. Anger is the quick way to control a situation, and patience is the long game. Literally, patience is the long game, and it's harder. It's harder because we think I can just get this done quickly right now, and by showing my dominance. And God is calling us to patience, and Solomon is saying, "Look, you're better than a mighty man when you're a patient man." To build a society of peace, whether a home, a business, a church, or a nation, it takes a man who has control of himself and is willing to play the long game. And so, a patient man is a very strong man. And so don't mistake patience for weakness. Now, there are some people who avoid confrontation who are indeed weak. They're cowards. But don't mistake that with patience. Patience, as Rich was talking about earlier, it's not inactivity. You are doing things along the way, but you're waiting on God to do the things that he promised he was going to do, and not trying to grasp, jump ahead. So that takes a lot of strength. Patience takes a lot of strength. So any more words on patience?
No, that's good.
All right. Well, how do you cultivate this? Well, how do you cultivate this type of patience? Well, patience, like I said, is a discipline that has to be cultivated just like any other discipline. Where patience is different than some other self-disciplines is the fact that some of the stressors that we face many times are outside of our control. It's not like choosing, for instance, if you want to get stronger physically, you choose what to do. You can exercise. If you want to stress yourself intellectually, you can study. But patience, lots of times, the circumstances are normally outside of our control. We don't control the source of stress. And stress is what reveals our weakness, and also what makes us stronger if we hold up to it. Developing mental toughness that is characteristic of patience involves the acceptance of pain that comes with these stressors and responding to them by choosing to act patiently. And that is a choice. This is not one of those things. If you're always griping, complaining, whining, and moaning about the stressors in your life, you are weak in cultivating weakness that makes you susceptible to crack down the line. Stress reveals your weakness, again, not to destroy you, but to show you where you are and where you're susceptible to attack and slavery. Now, as with the other disciplines, patience is freedom, freedom from being dominated by your desires that others can use to control you, freedom to be who God called you to be and accomplish what he put you here to do. So making yourself stop in irritating situations and think about what this anger is revealing about you, whether it's right and how or how it helps you to reach the goal, is vital to developing patience. Now, patience is not this magic spell that God performs on you and suddenly you're just patient. Patience will not be given to you like you're being sprinkled with some sort of pixie dust, or have some spiritual gas fill up your body in your private prayer closet. Patience is going to come through tests. It's going to come through trials. It's going to come through stress. Patience is a response that you choose. And so that's why it's a self-discipline. You can go in your prayer closet, you can pray for patience, and when you do so, God's going to put you through some stressors. He's going to put you through some trials. He's going to put you through some exercises in order to strengthen your patience. So this means that the responsibility of being slow to anger rests solely upon you. There's no blaming your circumstances or other people. And that's one of the things that, again, as men, one of the things that is characteristic of a man is to take responsibility. And so, yes, there are times where people irritate us, aggravate us, we become impatient and we react. But the thing that we don't do in those situations is then turn around and completely blame them for doing so. We have to take responsibility for how we respond to them. That's what we do as men, is because my lack of self-control is not somebody else's problem. My lack of self-control is my problem. And I need to take responsibility for how I do that. And so the first step in cultivating patience is we must own this responsibility in how we respond. And once we own the responsibility for our patience, we can start to seek to respond to the stress in our lives by being slow to anger and working towards solutions that will bring God's wise order of peace. So, Rich, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So I like what you said there about responsibility. There's the old saying, your life may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility.
Right.
So, we can all be victims of various things, but what matters is what you do with it. And you do have to take responsibility for yourself in whatever circumstances you're in. So I think that's really true. And all of this about patience, the problem with patience is that in order to learn patience, you have to wait. I mean, there's no getting around that,
Exactly.
It's like if you want to be strong, you have to lift. Like, there's so many lessons in life and so many strengths was to develop in us that are just difficult. And I think the earlier in life you learn this particular lesson, the better off you are. Life is generally lived on an ascending scale of difficulty.
Yeah.
It gets harder as you go. Algebra is harder than the math that you do in second grade, and calculus is harder than algebra. Now, if you are really good, like if you've really mastered everything, you can do that next level. And it may not even necessarily feel like it's harder to you, but it is harder. It's more difficult. And what God wants from us, what God is doing is he wants us strong. He wants us mature, and he puts us through an obstacle course called life. And through that obstacle course, he's seeking to make us strong. And the obstacles tend to get harder as you go. I talk to college students about this. They're like, oh, I'm so busy now. I'm like, you think you're busy now. Just wait. Like you think you're busy, but this is nothing. The time pressures that you feel in life right now are nothing to what is coming later in life. It feels that way to you because you're busier than you were in high school, but you're not as busy as you're going to be. There's not as much pressure on you in various areas as there's going to be in the future. Life gets harder as you go. Life is warfare. You have to understand life is warfare. And there's a very real sense in which you never get a day off of that warfare.
Right.
Every single day is a battle, and it's supposed to be. Every single day will have its trials, its struggles, its difficulties, and that's on purpose. That's not because God has lost control of your life or of the universe. That's because God is in control and things are unfolding according to his plan, which includes lots of hard things. And God will toss something new into your life to see what you do with it. He'll allow some new temptation to arise, or some new challenge, or some new trial that comes along. And that is very much tied to God's purpose in your life, which is to bring you to maturity. And in parent, we've kind of gone back and forth talking to young men and then talking to, say, fathers who have got young men or sons in the home that they're raising. And it's the same kind of thing. This is what you have to do with your son. I made it my goal. This is how I thought about it as my kids were getting into like that teenage years, is to train them in such a way that when they got to like 30 years old, they could say, Dad, life wasn't as hard as you told me it would be. Because then I would know that I prepared them well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like then I would know that, okay, like I got them ready. There's the old saying, don't prepare the way for the child, prepare the child for the way. I
Yeah.
think in fathering, I say parenting as a kind of
Yeah.
summarizing. We shouldn't really talk about parenting because parenting is not this androgynous thing. Mothers and
Right.
fathers are different. But
Right.
so mothering, and we should talk about mothering and fathering, but the sum total of mothering and fathering is parenting. So I'll still use that term. But this is what you want to do. I think some parents they feel that's him, and this may be more moms than dads, but dads can do it too. You sort of bubble wrap your child. You make sure they never go through anything difficult, and then they're totally unprepared for the real world. I think we've seen that with the rise of gentle parenting and that kind of thing, where a lot of parents have not prepared their kids to be competent and confident adults. They
Yeah.
never let their kids take any risks. They always bailed their kids out. They didn't let their kids deal with any consequences from bad decisions. They didn't give their kids very much responsibility. They made everything easy for them. That is parental malpractice. You're doing your kids a huge disservice if you do that, because life is hard. Life is hard for everybody. Some people's life is much harder than others. I've had in many ways an easy life compared to lots of people I know.
Yeah.
But I mean, the reality is everybody's life is hard. There's one of the church fathers, I don't remember who it was, but he said something like, be kind to everyone you meet because everyone's has a hard life. And I'm like, there's a lot of wisdom in that. There's a lot, and I'm
Mhm.
probably butchering the quote, but it's something like that. And there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
That everybody's life has got a certain set of struggles. Another way to think about this, the Bible talks about a cup of suffering. And of course,
Mhm.
Jesus drank a unique cup of suffering, but all of us have a cup of suffering to drink.
Yeah.
And you can't refuse that cup. You can decide what to do with it as you drink it,
Right.
how you're going to respond to those trials, that suffering, but you have to drink the cup. You don't get a choice. You don't get a say. So some people have to deal with cancer. Some people have to deal with broken or difficult family relationships. Some people
Mhm.
have to deal with a really difficult boss at work. Some people have to deal with a husband or wife who's got all kinds of health problems. Some people have to deal with a child that's uniquely difficult for some reason. Some people have to, I mean, it's just the list of potential trials is endless. It's as broad as life itself. So you just have to be ready for that and not be surprised. Of course, then you stack on top of that suffering we might have to endure as Christians, the mockery sometimes that Christians face. We don't have, in our culture here in America, we don't face the kind of overt persecution that Christians do in other parts of the world. But there can, particularly in 2026, there can be suffering for Christians in America. There can be ostracism. People can give you a
Yeah.
hard time, call you a bigot or racist or whatever because of your Christian convictions. It's just got to roll off of you. That's just life. Life is supposed to be hard.
Right.
Your life is a story. God is the author of it, and you cannot tell a good story without hard things happening within the story.
Right.
So you just have to be ready for them. And again, the purpose of those trials is to bring you to maturity. You're being put to the test. Will you get angry and blow up in a fit of rage, or you learn to channel that anger in a constructive way? Will
Right.
you get bitter, or will you be patient? Will you seek forgiveness when you need to and grant forgiveness when others seek it from you? Or are you going to be petty and difficult and
Yeah.
selfish? So there's so much bound up here in how we approach life. And I think it's really hard for Americans because we live in such a prosperous, even though everybody wants to complain about the economy and how expensive everything is. I mean, the reality is we still are incredibly prosperous.
Yeah.
We live in so many ways the most comfortable, easy lives that anyone in all of history has had. If you're middle class in America, your life has more comforts and conveniences and luxuries than kings experienced in, you don't have to go that far back in history to
Right.
say your life is easier and better than theirs. And still, we can sit there and complain about things. I don't remember if it was Doug Wilson or who it was, but he made the point. He's like, you've got Christians who are being thrown to the lions, who are optimistic about the growth of the kingdom and who are hopeful and joyful. And then you've got the guy sitting in his recliner chair and he's got the remote in one hand and a beer in the other hand, and he's grumbling about how hard things are. Well, it's just when you take a big picture, long-term view, all that just looks ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I think that's how it's very easy to be that way as an American, to think that you're owed an easy life. For almost every single person that listens to this podcast, I can almost guarantee you that your life is easier than your great great grandparents' life
Oh,
was.
yeah. Yeah.
And yet you're here because they persevered and they endured and they built something. That's why you're here. And so recognize that, yeah, your life is going to have trials. I mean, it used to be that people didn't have, this is another way of thinking about it. People didn't have to go exercise
Right.
because life was just work. Like, I
Right.
mean, every
Exactly.
day you're working with your body all day long. So you don't have to go to the gym.
Right.
Gyms only arose once people started working cushy office jobs in air
Exactly.
conditioned buildings.
And
Well, okay. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, we have it pretty easy. So be grateful for that. I think one of the best antidotes to a lot of the complaining and grumbling and even unrighteous anger is simply learning to practice gratitude.
yeah.
Being thankful is the answer to so many problems in life. That if you can learn to be thankful for what God has given to you, but we take so much for granted. We don't say thank you.
Right.
And we just think that we deserve something better. There's that spirit of entitlement that is so prevalent. And again, so if you want to shift gears and talk about this from a fathering perspective, one thing you want to do as you give your children increasing responsibilities as they grow up is also make sure that they don't take things for granted, that they learn how to be grateful for what they're given. We've been given all kinds of things. We can complain about the boomers or whatever. We can complain about this or that trend in the culture, but the reality is we still have it pretty good
Yeah.
historically, judged by a long-term view of history.
Yeah.
And that's something we should be very grateful for. You still have, if you are a young man in America today, let's say you're a young white Christian male, so you're like the ultimate villain in our culture. You still have more opportunity for success and for a good life than most of the people alive in the world today and most of the people who've ever lived.
Right.
Now,
Exactly.
if you've got a sense of entitlement and you think you deserve a yacht and a mansion and all of these other kind of things, then yes, maybe you'll end up disappointed. But if you can go into each day with realistic expectations and you're willing to work hard, there's all kinds of potential there to build a really great life. And I
Yeah.
just think I think it's so easy for young men today to take the black pill and think, oh, things are so bad and they're getting worse and there's so many things arrayed against me. What can I do? Who can stand against such madness and such evil? Well, that's your job. And every generation has had this. And I think we've talked about this on this podcast before, but I'll use the example again and then we can wrap this up, Bill. But it's like, would you rather be 18 years old in 2026 or in 1942 or in 1917 or in 1861 or in 1929? You can pick lots of times in the past where, if you were 18, you're probably going off to war or you're dealing with a depression. There's so many, it could be so much worse than it is.
Yeah.
So be grateful for what you have, be grateful for your opportunities and seize them.
Yeah.
Don't just soak in your own anger. Do something.
Right.
Do
Right.
whatever that next thing is.
Yep. Well, seeing that you were quoting great theologians, there's another one, um, John Wayne, who said life is hard. It's harder when you're stupid.
It's harder when you're stupid.
In some ways, that reflects Proverbs. Life is
Absolutely.
hard, and it's
It's a good
harder when
summary.
you're a fool. And there are ways, in wrapping this up, and we'll do this briefly. There are ways that you can guard against moving into sinful anger and develop patience. Solomon tells us to guard our friendships. In Proverbs 22, he says, make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man do not go, lest you learn his ways and set a snare for your soul. And so you got to be careful about your relationships, whether they're online or interpersonal, face-to-face relationships, the music that you listen to. I know some people say, well, that's not such a big deal. There's a lot of angry music. I know in the gym, and some of these gyms today don't do this, but there were times when I was trying to lift heavy weights and I would listen to guys like Five Finger Death Punch. And those guys are just angry.
Yeah.
If you listen to that kind of music all the time, you're making friendship with it and you're going to learn to be angry like that. So you need to be careful about all your relationships and all of the friendships that you have and make sure that you don't get into a friendship with an angry man, because birds of a feather flock together. Paul talks about bad company corrupts good morals. And so and he's saying what Solomon says here basically is you become friends with this guy, you're going to start sharing character with him. And so you got to join yourself and you got to make friendships, as we've talked about it in other podcasts, with men of character, men who have patience, instead of angry men. If you just get into this mob, this gang of angry men, as Proverbs 1, I think characterizes this gang of young men, you're going to become an angry man. And so be careful about your online relationships. There's also something that Rich mentioned earlier, and that is forgiveness. And we could spend a lot of time on forgiveness, but just generally speaking, you need to deal with sin. Keep short list of your sins, so to speak. You need to confess sins if there are things that you've done to another person or another person done to you. You need to try to take care of that, but you also need to deal with that. You need to forgive them. You need to refuse to take revenge on these people and forgive them of their debts. And then the last thing that I want to mention is that of prayer. One of the things that you can see in the Psalms as you read through them, and there are a lot of imprecatory Psalms, the Psalms where the psalmist is praying for God to curse the wicked. And there's obviously anger there. I mean, God is angry with the wicked every day, and so we can become angry with the wicked. But there are lots of things in our lives that we cannot control. And especially as you see social media and lots of people talking about government practices and things like that, there's no problem commenting on those things. But some people become so consumed over things that they cannot control. And they let those things dominate their lives. And they just live in this constant state of anger. But that's not the way we're supposed to be living. We should be the most joyful people in the world as God's people. And so we shouldn't be living in this rage all the time. One of the ways that we do that, one of the ways we live joyfully, is that we turn our anger over things that we can't control. We turn it over to God in prayer. And He's the one who's in control of all things. And we entrust it to Him that He's going to take care of it. And then you leave it there. There are lots of things in our government. I live in the state of Illinois, and our government,
I got a lot to be angry about there.
I got a lot to be angry about. Our governor just gave the state of the state address, and he lives in an absolute fantasy world in terms of our economic position and the fact that hundreds of thousands of people have under his administration have left the state, leaving tax burdens on us and things like that. And yes, that is I'm very angry about those things. We've become the abortion center for the Midwest because of all the trigger laws that went in when Roe v. Wade was reversed. And there are lots of things to be angry about here, but there are lots of things. While we can be politically active, we have a guy in our church running for an office in our state General Assembly. And we can do those types of things, but there are lots of things about this that I cannot control. We can't control. And so we turn those things over to God in prayer. We do everything that we can, but then we just leave it to Him, and we enjoy life as best we can with what He's given. And we can't just live as angry people. And so guard your friendship, be quick to forgive, and turn things over to God in prayer and leave them with Him. All right. So, Rich, any more things?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the imprecatory Psalms there. That is one constructive way to channel your anger about things in the world that you don't have authority over or responsibility for, but that still impact you or that you see impacting other people. And some people think, well, if you pray those prayers, isn't that going to make you a violent, bloodthirsty person? Actually, it's the opposite.
Right.
What praying those prayers, when we pray the imprecatory Psalms, we're leaving vengeance to the Lord.
Right.
We know God will judge the wicked. We're just asking Him to do what He said He would do, which is judge the wicked. So, and it actually frees us from feeling like we've got to do some kind of vigilante kind of thing. We've got to somehow take matters into our own hands, which that kind of thing is a disaster. The imprecatory Psalms free you from that. I can't end abortion in our land, but I can pray down God's judgment on those who murder babies. I can't fix feminism, but I can pray down God's judgment on those who promote it. I can't fix a tyrannical government that I might be living under or somebody else might be living under. May not be any direct measure I can take to deal with that, but I can pray for God's judgment on the tyrants.
Right.
So it's actually a way of leaving vengeance to the Lord. It doesn't make you bloodthirsty. It has the exact opposite effect, I think. Obviously, there are times where you throw off a tyrannical government. There are times where
Yeah.
you do take action. But this is one of the things we need to recognize is that when anger gets run out to the, just like when lust gets run out to the end and it becomes fornication or adultery, when anger gets run out to the end, it becomes violence. It becomes bloodshed. Well, Proverbs 6 tells us God hates those hands that shed innocent
Right.
blood. He
Yeah.
hates hands that shed innocent blood. And so, uh, why do you have to control your anger? Well, because God commands you to. And if you don't, your anger is going to be destructive. It can destroy you, it can destroy other people. Your uncontrolled, undisciplined anger is never going to make things better. Never. It's always going to make things worse. You have to remember there's no situation so bad that it can't be made worse. And one of the ways we can make a bad situation worse is with undisciplined, unrestrained, uncontrolled, unrighteous anger.
Yes, absolutely. So, as always, as we go through Proverbs, you've got two choices. You've got two ways, the two ways you can walk. And one's the way of slavery, slavery to your desires, or letting everybody push your buttons so that you're angry all the time and you're letting them control your life. And so you're enslaved to your desires and therefore enslaved to them and to everything else in the world around you. Or you could be free. You can be free by mastering your desires. You can be free by not allowing other people to control you. So being quick-tempered, being explosive in anger is slavery and can lead ultimately to hell itself, as we've talked about. Being slow to anger is the way to freedom. So you need to choose wisely. So work on your anger, work on being patient, discipline yourself. It's good for you. It's good for everybody around you. It's good for the kingdom. So get to work. We'll see you next time.